here we go. Hello, everybody. Good evening. Welcome. Welcome to the 32nd annual NASIG conference. We have a very exciting program this year that I'm very much looking forward to. And I want to say many thanks to program planning chairs Steve Kelly from Wake Forest University and Violetta Illick from Northwestern University. A lot of words, as well as their committee for the hard work they put into it. I have a little bit of data to share with you about who is here. We have 227 people from academic libraries, 5 from public libraries, 16 from special libraries. There are 15 people here representing publishers, 22 from library services vendors. And I should note that I would like to see more of you from publishers and library service vendors in the next years. So please tell your colleagues that they are very welcome at NASIG and are a necessary part of our conversation. We have 6 countries represented among our attendees, the US, Canada, and Mexico, of course, for the formerly known as North American Serial Interest Group. But also, we have the UK, Trinidad and Tobago, and our longest distance traveler from Nigeria. Yeah. Not bad for North America. We have 40 of the 50 states plus DC, and North Carolina happens to have the most attendees from a state not connected to Indiana. I could go on, I am a data girl, but I think you get the picture. I would like to take a moment to recognize our sponsors this year. The American Chemical Society Publications, AIP Publishing, the Rockefeller University Press, Taylor and Francis Group, EBSCO, Springer Nature, Duke University Press, Oxford University Press, Project Muse, Harasowitz, Penn State University Press, SPIE Digital Library, and W.T. Cox. If your organization's name wasn't listed and you want to sponsor a future NASIG conference, please get in touch with Katie Giannani for more information on how to do that. Lastly, right now, I want to say NASIG lost a very valuable member of our organization this year, a man who was an essential component of creating NASIG. So at this time, I'd like to invite Susan Davis to come up and speak for a few minutes about John Riddick. Thank you, Susan. You are going to be blinded.
Okay, John Riddick. He was an acquisitions librarian at Central Michigan University when I met him. I met him actually before the idea, I think, of NASIG came into his mind, which was actually a funny story, which you can ask me about that later. But what led to NASIG was traveling to the UK Serials Group. There were 16 American librarians who went on this International Serials Conference trip. And it was an interesting trip because we didn't really know that the UKSG was the international conference that we were going to be going to. And at that conference, John observed the way that the delegates, as they called them at the UKSG, they interacted. You had vendors, publishers, librarians. It was all very, egalitarian. Everyone was equal. And he thought, we really need to have an idea, or we need to take this idea back to North America. And so he began in his way. He was very, I don't want to say quiet, but he had a very purposeful way of engaging you in the project. And he reached out, he developed a network of people who would do a study, and then he invited other people to get involved. And here it was, you were young, you wanted to get involved. Oh yes, you can do this, you can do that. And he would look at you with those steely blue eyes, and he made you believe that you could really do the task that he had in mind. But he was very serious about having NASIG be, again, a very egalitarian type organization where, again, people interacted in a respectful discourse to solve problems. We're not here to bash people. You're not here to, promote your product, except, of course, now at the Vendor Expo, it's perfectly acceptable to do that, yes. But in general, the idea was to be, a group working together to solve the industry's problems. And John also had an idea that, as the English like to do, you have the afternoon sherry. That was one of his better ways. Oh, let's go have a conversation, with a beverage, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think, what's important about NASIG is to think about the connections that you'll make, the networking. Again, we heard earlier at the NASIG mentoring, people develop lifelong friendships. So we'll all have sort of a virtual toast with our little sherry glass. So here's to John Riddick.
Thank you so much. So, as Susan mentioned, NASIG was inspired by UKSG, which is our sister organization from across the pond, and we are very lucky this year that we have their brand new executive director, Sarah Bull, coming to bring us some greetings from UKSG.
Thank you, Anna, and also I remember that Sherry story as well because I found out about that while researching the UKSG archives earlier this year, so it's definitely an enduring tradition for John Merriman and John Riddick, so I'm really delighted to hear of it this side of the pond. Thank you to Anna and to the UKSG board for inviting me to give the UKSG greetings speech. It's customary for the UKSG chair to speak at this conference, as Anna did at the UKSG conference in April. Unfortunately, Kate Price couldn't be here today because she's just got a new job as university librarian at Queen Mary University of London, so she didn't feel that she could justify the trip in her first week in her new job, so which I can understand. And so I'm really fortunate to be able to make it to NASIG this year as an e-resources librarian. Latterly, I've always wanted to attend NASIG and never managed to get the budget to do it. So this is a real good opportunity for me to finally make it to NASIG. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the content. It's a great program. It's also a great set of social events. So I'm really looking forward to the baseball and the IndyCar racing factory. So I'm just really delighted to be here. Also, the weather's a lot warmer here than it is in the UK right now. And of course, you may be aware that UK are holding a general election today. So I'm thanking heaven for postal voting. So I'm going to be watching the results through the evening as they start coming in, and I'll let anybody that's interested know what's going on. But if anybody is interested, the exit polls give the Conservative Party the largest party majority. We'll see whether that holds up in the morning. So I just want to talk for a couple of minutes about some of the things that UKSG has been doing over the last 12 months. Firstly, covering the fact that it's also a very special year for UKSG this year. It's our 40th anniversary year in 2017-18. UKSG was formed by John Merriman, and to celebrate the 40th anniversary, we've had a very special conference event this year that was attended by around 950 delegates, about a third librarians, a third publishers, and a third intermediaries. So it was a really good a good turnout for the 40th anniversary conference. We also commissioned a short UKSG film, which you can see on the UKSG homepage and on YouTube if you're interested. But it was a really exciting project to be involved with because it meant that I could look at all the archives of UKSG and look at how our community has changed over the last 40 years and what new opportunities lie ahead. So if you're interested, it's on the UKSG website and it's well worth a look. So the UKSG conference was in Harrogate this year. We had the usual mix of live streaming of the plenary sessions, and this year we experimented with the Twitter wall for the first time, which was very exciting. So we did that for the closing plenary. It worked well. There wasn't any swearing or any other comments that didn't quite make it to the live streaming. So it was a really good experiment, and we'll be doing that again. More widely outside of the conference, we've been taking a step back over the last 2 years to really look at UKSG's priorities. its interests, where it wants to expand, and some of the structural issues that we have with UKSG. As you all know from being NASIG members, volunteers are hugely important to both UKSG and NASIG. They really are the lifeblood of our organisations. These membership organisations are delivered by members for members. So the content of sessions like this over the next few days are all developed by volunteers. And at UKSG, as Anna also spoke at the UKSG conference about the same issue, there are challenges in making sure that we have enough volunteers to deliver these activities and to make sure that they are supported operationally so that we don't get involved in all of the minutiae of operational logistics. So one of the things that UKSG has done this year is to create 3 new staff posts, mine being one of them. So I will be leading UKSG operationally, working with the board to develop some of our strategic priorities into actual implementation. And we're also recruiting a new marketing and membership manager as well. So it's a really exciting time for UKSG this year, and hopefully we'll be able to deliver on some of those interesting activities. Before I finish, I just want to cover one final thing, and that is our charitable remit at UKSG. We're a not-for-profit organisation and a registered charity, so what we do to support the communities is hugely important for our professional development, so that we have opportunities for members who can't be at conferences or training seminars in person, but they get that chance to interact with our organisation and its activities. So we have a Platinum Open Access journal called Insights, which is fully funded by UKSG. We run a series of webinars that are free to the community. And we've also expanded our bursary and awards programme this year so that we now offer bursaries to attend the UKSG conference to students, to early career professionals, to further education colleges whose staff development budgets are being massively cut in the UK at the current time, and also to librarians from the Myanmar region to enable them to come to a UK conference. So I hope that gives you a flavour of some of the things that UKSG has been involved with. I'd like to close at that point and just say thank you again for having me, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the rest of the conference, and I hope you all have a wonderful time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah. I have a little bit of housekeeping for you. Just a reminder that the conference evaluation is online. I know that we haven't had much of the conference yet, but be keeping that in mind. Make some notes later on. There's information about that in your registration packet. Please remember to silence your electronic devices before the sessions so that you don't interrupt anybody. And also, speakers, please remember to use the microphones. Even if you're in a small room, it's really helpful for people who have difficulty hearing things clearly. Also, don't cover your mouth up when you're doing it, because people who read lips also need to see your face. And now I would like to recognize the people who have been coming to this conference for a while. If you have been to a NASIG conference at least 5 years, would you stand up? Very good, very good. 10 years? Stay standing? Okay. 15 years? 20 years? 25 years? 30 years? All 32 of them? I see you all sitting over there. Congratulations. Thank you so much. I would like to point out that we have 2 people here that I didn't mention earlier among the demographics. We have 2 retired folks that are here for the conference, so they won't break their streak. Thank you, Joyce and Greg. I'd like to introduce the chairs of the Awards and Recognition Committee to recognize our award winners this year. Mary Bailey from Kansas State University and Dell Williams from California State University, Northridge, although I think maybe Dell's not quite here yet, sadly.
Dell is still in Houston, awaiting a flight.
You're going to do this from the floor?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I don't have my helper here, I'm going to just do this out here from the floor. So we have any number of really talented young people and who are here for the first time or have put together a CV that just was kind of amazing to us. So we want to recognize all of our award winners tonight. So I'm going to start with the first timers. If I can have each of you come forward as I read your name. Ricardo Andrade from Columbia University. Kimberly DeRosa, University of Colorado at Denver. Moon Kim from California State University, Fullerton. Catherine Mason, Eastern Michigan University. And Deja Rubel from Ferris State University. So these are our first timers. So hopefully you've got the right one. Kathy. Deja. Thank you. Okay, our Fritz Schwartz Serials Education Scholarship this year goes to Celia Gavitt from University of Buffalo. You're welcome. Our Horizon Award is sponsored by EBSCO, and this year's winner is Fiona McNabb from PubMed Central. We always have two John Merriman joint awards. The NASIG winner who went to UKSG this year was Melissa Cantrell, and she couldn't be here tonight. She had a family event going on, so she made it to the UKSG, but not here. And our winner from UKSG, who's with us tonight, is Emer Evans. And she's from Queen's University in Belfast. Our John Riddick student grants this year go to Bethany Green, Courtney McAllister, and Sarah Page. I'm sorry, I didn't tell you where they're from. Bethany's from University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Courtney is from University of South Carolina at Columbia. And Sarah is from University of North Texas. Our Mexican student grant winner is Ava Leyva. I am not even going to try to pronounce the name of her school, but if she's right here. We have two paraprofessional specialists that are with us this year, Patrick Kenny from Wheaton College and Tammy Finch from Ferris State University. Okay. You're welcome. And last but not least, our Rose Robuchon Scholarship went to Katie DiVitrio, right? Close, close, from University of Colorado at Denver. So please, everyone make them welcome this year and say hi. Anna?
Well, as has been mentioned many times, NASIG is a volunteer organization, and every year we ask a couple of people to take on one of the most time-consuming and detailed tasks we have, planning and the logistics of our annual conference. You don't know how much work it is and it takes to do this right until something goes wrong. If everything seems flawless and invisible, then CPC has done their work well. It's quite a thing to ask someone who does not have conference planning experience to do, and yet we manage to pull it off every year. If you see someone wearing a checkered flag pin this week, please take a moment to thank them. So with that, I would like to present to you your conference planning co-chairs for the 2017 conference, Danielle Williams from the University of Evansville and Sue Wigan from St. Mary's College, to share some announcements and to introduce our speaker for the opening session.
I'm going to try and read. I'm going to stand in the shadows. We have some housekeeping for you. Tonight, the reception is at the Dallara IndyCar factory where they actually build Indy cars, and I'm very excited about it, but I've been there 5 times already. So hopefully you'll be excited as well. We are busing you there. Buses will start leaving at 6:30 right outside the front door. So just head down there whenever you're through here, and we'll get you over there and get you fed. There is a cash bar. I know NASIG is very social, so we've got you covered there. Dinner is served at 7. It is a buffet, and it's Indiana native food. I'm not sure what that means. I'm not from Indiana originally, but they said, there will be chicken, there will be grits, corn is going to feature heavily, and the big thing, and Ann McGee actually told me about this, is the sugar cream pie, which is an Indiana specialty. So everyone be sure and get an Indiana sugar cream pie. Buses start leaving. They're going to make a circuit. They'll start leaving Dallara at 8. The last bus leaves at 10. If you're not on the last bus, you're going to have to find your own way back because I'm not going to go and get you. If you purchased a ticket for a Dallara IndyCar ride and you haven't got it yet, I have it for you. If you have a vegetarian meal ticket and you haven't got it, I have it for you. If you already have your vegetarian meal ticket, all you have to do is wave down a server at the Dallara and they will bring you your meal. Just make sure they know who you are and where you're going to be seating. If you didn't purchase a ticket to ride, and I don't know why you wouldn't, they will be selling them there, and they're $25 each. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I'm not saying that just because we need you guys to buy some tickets, because this is going to be awesome. So take this opportunity, which you probably will not have again, and ride in an actual Indy car on the streets of Speedway, just down the street from the Indianapolis 500 Speedway. Baseball tickets, if you purchased a baseball ticket and you don't have it, I'm not holding it hostage, but if you want to bring me chocolate to pick up your ticket, you might get a better reception from me for that. And I think that's all I have right now, and Sue is going to introduce our speaker.
Hi, I'm here to introduce Sally Perkins, and she's going to talk to us today about the charm, the harm, and the daring of Dillinger. It's a suspense-filled story about the life of the run-of-the-mill boy who inadvertently received a world-class criminal education that propelled him into a criminal career. In following John Dillinger from boredom to desperation to sheer audacity, the story depicts the infamous trickster who outwitted law enforcement in a 14-month wild chase in and around the state of Indiana. And I realize as I'm reading this that I should have printed it much bigger. So, what does this say? Okay, Sally has a 3-bucket career, she tells us. Bucket number 1, she's a professional storyteller, performing stories of all sorts to audiences of all ages. She has been commissioned numerous times to research, craft, and perform historical stories throughout Indiana. She tells wisdom stories with the violinist and folk tales to kids. In October, you can find her in cemeteries telling ghost stories. Bucket number 2, Sally coaches professionals who need help telling the stories of their organizations. Her clients range from United Way fundraisers to executives at Union Pacific Railroad. Bucket number 3, Sally teaches public speaking at Butler University using her storytelling skills and the PhD in rhetorics she earned at the University of Kansas. Thank you. Many, and Sally wrote this, many years ago. The story you're about to hear was commissioned by the Indiana Historical Society and Storytelling Arts of Indiana in 2013. So sit back or sit up, relax, and enjoy the ride through the charm, the harm, and the daring of Dillinger.
Did we lose those lights? Well, then I'll come out here for a while. How's that? Welcome to Indiana, the land of cornfields, of colts, and the land of comedians like Red Skelton and David Letterman, the land of race cars, the land of Hoosier basketball, and the land of America's first public enemy, #1. No matter where you come from, perhaps when you were growing up, your growing up went something like mine. The sound of Sunday morning was the church bells. And the sound of Monday through Friday, of course, was the school bell. But the sound of Saturday morning was this. Dun, 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 dun. Sing it. Dun, 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 dun. Right? It was the sound of merry melodies and Looney Tunes. Specifically for me, it was the sound of Bugs Bunny. I could not wait on a Saturday morning to get in front of my television set so I could watch Bugs Bunny cartoons, even though it was the same plot every single week. You know, Bugs Bunny being chased by his pursuers, Elmer Fudd, Daffy Duck, good, there's lights, Yosemite Sam. My personal favorite was when Elmer Fudd would waddle his behind up in the air, looking for Bugs Bunny, who would come around from behind, stick his elbow onto Elmer with that carrot sticking out of his mouth and say, "What? What's up, Doc?" Well, then when I got older, I discovered that that same plot had actually been going on for 30 years prior to when I was watching it. Because you see, Bugs Bunny was born in 1938. Now, in 1938, of course, he was only seen on the big screen because there were no television sets in people's houses, which for me begs an important question. What in the world did kids do on a Saturday morning before there were cartoons to watch? Well, what would you do if you were a 12-year-old boy in 1915? On a Saturday morning, your father was busy at the grocery store he owned in Indianapolis and busy preparing for his marriage to his second wife because your own mother had died when you were just 3. What would you do if your sister, who was 14 years older than you and had always taken care of you, was now busy with 7 kids of her own? You didn't care all that much about school? What would you do if you were John Herbert Dillinger, Jr.? Well, I would guess that very likely you would have done exactly what he did. You would have gone out and played on the neighborhood baseball team, or you might have gotten an ice cream cone. Those had only been around for a few years. Or maybe you would have stolen some coal from the railroad tracks, things that lots of boys did back then. But maybe those things weren't enough for a boy who lost his mother when he was 3. Maybe Dillinger needed more structured activities like we give kids today. Maybe he needed karate lessons or archery camp or less gluten in his diet. But he didn't have those things, so he just grew tall and handsome. Eventually, he looked like a bit of a combination of Clark Gable and Johnny Depp. Well, when he was 16 years old, His father sold the grocery store in Indianapolis and moved to a farm in Mooresville, Indiana. But farm life and John Dillinger didn't get along so well. He grew bored, agitated, restless on the farm. He dropped out of school, was in and out of several different jobs, got married. But then when he was about 20 years old, after he was married, he realized that marriage wasn't solving his feelings of agitation and boredom. So he started to spend time in the pool halls. One September night in 1924, Dillinger was shooting pool and he said, "I need an easy way to make some money." Well, a buddy of his by the name of Ed Singleton, who happened to be an ex-convict and happened to be 10 years older than Dillinger, suggested they pull a stick-up. So they worked their way through the fog of cigar and cigarette smoke in the pool hall. They looked out the window and down the street to Frank Morgan's grocery store. Now they knew that every Saturday night, Frank Morgan came out of his grocery carrying a bag filled with his earnings from the week. So Dillinger started to ask around people, how much you think might be in Frank Morgan's bag? Then on a cool September evening in 1924, 20-year-old John Dillinger sat on the steps of the Mooresville Christian Church. He held in his hand a bolt wrapped in a handkerchief. Ed Singleton sat in his car in an alley nearby, ready for the getaway, and they waited. Pretty soon, Frank Morgan came walking down the street. Dillinger darted out in front of him. He whacked Frank Morgan on the side of the head. Morgan fell to the ground. Dillinger pulled out a revolver and said, this is a stick-up, man. Get your hands up. But Frank Morgan was a fighter. He got to his feet. He wrestled the gun out of Dillinger's hand. The gun fell to the ground and inadvertently went off. Bang! Then Frank Morgan called out the Freemasons' secret distress signal. It's sort of like a secret form of 911. "Oh Lord our God, is there no help for the widow's son?" Yeah, Dillinger had about the same reaction that you're having. He didn't know what to do with that, so he ran off to the alley only to discover that Ed Singleton had long since driven off on his car. So Dillinger took off on foot. But about an hour and a half later, he worked his way back into downtown Mooresville. He walked into a late-night cafe and started asking people, "Have you seen Frank Morgan? Was he shot? Was he hurt?" All right, they weren't exactly getting tweets on their iPhone giving them the latest breaking news of downtown Mooresville. They didn't know what he was talking about, and he pretty much gave himself away. He was arrested 2 days later. Now, initially, he denied the charges that were brought before him, but as he sat in the cell, his father came to visit him, and when he did, tears of guilt spilled out of Dillinger's eyes as he confessed everything that he had done. They listened to the advice of the prosecuting attorney and pled guilty. Then they waited with bated breath in that courtroom as Judge Joseph Williams walked in. He pounded his gavel on the desk and declared, "For conspiracy to commit felony, 2 to 14 years, state penitentiary. For assault with intent to rob, 10 to 20 years, state penitentiary." Well, we might call Dillinger's punishment a sentence. Or we could call it a full-ride scholarship to not one, but 2 of Indiana's finest criminal academies. Eventually, Dillinger spent time at the Michigan City State Penitentiary, and there, he met some fine, fine gentlemen. Men like John Hamilton, also known in the underworld as Three-Finger Jack. Harry Pierpont, a.k.a. Handsome Harry. Charlie Mackley, known as Fat Charlie. These men were wonderful, and they took Dillinger in as if they were professors at a university wanting to share all of their knowledge. It was as if he was taking courses like Methods in Bank Robbery 101. And they, in turn, were quite impressed with Dillinger as a student, so much so that eventually they assigned him what you and I might call a senior thesis project. They suggested that he should turn himself around and become a model prisoner so that he might be released in a couple of years, and from the outside, he could help them execute an escape plan. So Dillinger started to shape up. Sure enough, on May 10th of 1933, Dillinger was released from the Michigan City State Penitentiary. He was nearly 30 years old, having served a 9-year sentence. Now, his half-brother Hubert came to pick him up that day, and as they were driving back down to Mooresville, Dillinger told his half-brother that he knew right from wrong and intended to live right. But as they were making that drive, Dillinger's stepmother, Hubert's mother, died of a stroke in that farmhouse. So when he walked in, he was not walking into a warm welcome ready to support his rehabilitation. He walked into a grief-stricken farm. And in no time, all of those feelings of agitation and restlessness crept right back into his skin. He looked in Indianapolis, but he simply saw in 1933 long lines of men standing at soup kitchens. If they couldn't get a job, there was no way he was going to be able to get one. So what were his choices? Well, he figured he could finish his senior thesis project. So in a matter of weeks, he violated his parole and he was off on a fundraising campaign to support the project. He was going to need, after all, things like guns, getaway cars, clothes for the prisoners. So in the months of June, July, August, and September of 1933, he gathered up several inmate friends that he had met over the years, and in those 4 months, they robbed 5 banks. Finally, in September of 1933, they had enough money, they bought the equipment they needed. And on a cool evening, Dillinger stood outside the Michigan City State Penitentiary wall, where he tossed 3 guns over the wall. Now, unfortunately, the wrong prisoner stumbled onto those guns the next day. That fellow ended up in solitary confinement, and the guns were confiscated. So then Dillinger had to come up with plan B. Let's see. This is it. This time he decided to package 7 guns in a box, which he carefully wrapped and professionally addressed to the tailor shop inside the prison. And somehow that box managed to work its way unopened into the hands of his professors, which is pretty remarkable when you think about what it takes for you and me to get a bottle of shampoo on an airplane today. Well, now by this time, the Indiana State Police Chief, Captain Matt Leach, wanted nothing more than to put Dillinger behind bars because Dillinger had escaped from several of his traps. In fact, Captain Leach honestly was starting to look an awful lot like Elmer Fudd, who just couldn't capture that squirmy rabbit. Well, 2 days after those guns landed in the hands of those prisoners, Captain Leach got a lead that Dillinger was in Ohio. He gave the lead up. The Ohio State Police managed to capture him. A few days after that, Captain Leach got a phone call from a detective in Ohio who said, Captain Leach, you might want to keep an eye out up there in Michigan City because we saw on Dillinger's person a map of the Michigan City area and what looks here like it might be the floor plans to the prison itself. To which Elmer Fudd replied, you've been reading too many detective novels, Detective. Dillinger ain't that big. Those guys couldn't escape from Michigan City if they tried. 2 days later, not 1, not 2, but 10 prisoners used those 7 guns to hold up enough guards that they walked right out the front door of the Michigan City State Penitentiary. Meanwhile, Dillinger sat in a county jail in Lima, Ohio, where he was awaiting trial for having robbed several Ohio banks. Now, county jails back in those days were designed to house the detainees, but also the sheriff and the sheriff's family, who typically lived upstairs. Well, about 2 weeks after those 10 men walked out of Michigan City, it was October of 1933, Columbus Day. Sheriff Sarber sat at his big wooden desk in his wooden swivel chair. Behind him, a nail poked out of the wall, holding the keys to the cell block, and next to it was his holster with his pistol in it. And as he sat filling out some paperwork, 3 gentlemen walked into the front door wearing nice suits, fedora hats. Sheriff Sarber said, "Can I help you, gentlemen?" They said, "We're here from the Indiana State Police to take John Dillinger to Michigan City." Sounded like a reasonable request to the sheriff. He said, "Oh, that's fine, gentlemen. Just show me your credentials, if you would." "These are our credentials." And standing before the sheriff was Three-Fingered Jack, Handsome Harry, and Fat Charlie, all there to confer Dillinger's degree on him. Well, before the sheriff could reach for his gun, Harry Pierpont shot him in the chest. The sheriff fell to the ground. Pierpont kicked him. He shot him again and again. The deputy sheriff came running in. Mrs. Sarber came running down the stairs, but they seized her. They seized the deputy. They seized those keys. They went back and unlocked it, let Dillinger out while they started to shove Mrs. Sarber and the deputy into the jailhouse. She pleaded with them to let her stay with her husband in what was obviously his dying moments. But they stuffed her in that cell block, and there she stood, weeping, helplessly watching her husband die, while the gang escaped. Well, in addition to the 3 faculty members, there were 2 car drivers plus Dillinger, now made a gang of 6. And in the months of November and December of 1933 into January of 1934, they set off on a spree of robberies. In fact, it was almost as if Dillinger was addicted to robbing banks. He himself said that he didn't drink much and he didn't smoke much, but boy, he did have a hard time driving past a bank without stopping to rob it. But as with any addiction, eventually things go wrong. On January 15th of 1934, they walked into a bank in East Chicago, Indiana. They pulled out their Tommy guns, lined people up against the wall. Dillinger pulled his signature move. He vaulted over the guardrail. But as he did, the vice president of the bank managed to sound the alarm button before anyone was expecting. Chaos broke out in the bank. Shots were fired into the air. They grabbed customers and employees, using them as human shields. They ran out the front door. But standing outside the bank was a police officer named Sergeant O'Malley. He was ready to shoot the gangsters, but he couldn't because of the human shields in front of him. Words were exchanged. Shots were fired into the air. And Sergeant O'Malley was shot and killed. Maybe by Three-Fingered Jack. Or maybe by John Dillinger. Well, the gang knew they were in trouble now, so they headed west all the way to Tucson, Arizona. But the small-town police there managed to set a trap and capture them within 2 weeks. So the authorities from the Midwest raced out there to battle for the extradition of these gangsters. And ultimately, it was decided that most of the gangsters would be brought back by way of train to the Midwest, but John Dillinger, oh, he would get an airplane ride to the Lake County Courthouse in Crown Point, Indiana, where he was wanted for the murder of Sergeant O'Malley. It was late on the night of January 30th, 1934, when Dillinger arrived at the Lake County Courthouse, which was run at the time by Sheriff Lillian Hawley. Her husband had been elected to the post, but had died in the line of duty a few months earlier. Well, she agreed that the capture and arrival of Dillinger was cause for celebration, so she permitted the beer to flow a little more freely that evening, and pretty soon photographers, reporters showed up to record this momentous occasion. At one point during all of this, Dillinger walked over to the prosecuting attorney, put his elbow onto the shoulder of the prosecuting attorney, who, without thinking, put his arm around Dillinger. And there they stood, smiling for the photo op, as if they were the best of friends. You can practically see a carrot in that photo and just hear him saying, "What's up, Doc?" Well, ultimately, it was decided that the Crown Point jail was an escape-proof jail. So there Dillinger stayed in the month of February of 1934. But by March, he decided that he needed to take matters into his own hands. So on a rainy Saturday morning in March of 1934, Dillinger stood in the corridor just on the other side of his cell for exercise time. A handyman by the name of Sam Cahoon happened to walk by, and pretty soon Sam Cahoon felt a jab in his back. He heard a voice behind him say, "Call Deputy Blunk over here before I blow your brains out." So Sam Cahoon called Deputy Blunk. Pretty soon Deputy Blunk came. He too felt that jab in his back. Then Dillinger told Sam Cahoon, "Now I want you to call the warden over here." Cahoon said, I can't do that." "All right, well, I don't want to hurt you, but I'm going to have to lock you up." So he locked Sam Cahoon in his cell. He had Deputy Blunk call the warden over, who then ended up in Dillinger's cell. He had Deputy Blunk call 3 more guards over, all of whom ended up in Dillinger's cell, while Dillinger then held a handful of guns. He then invited a young African-American prisoner named Herbert Youngblood to come along and join him on the escape. And using Deputy Blunk as their human shield, they walked through the corridors, gathering machine guns and guards, stuffing the guards in Dillinger's cell, kind of like fireflies in a jar. Then they walked down the corridor, out the front door, down the steps to the jail garage, where Dillinger looked around, but he couldn't find any keys to any of the cars, and it occurred to him that he was probably going to need some change, so they turned around and walked back down the corridor of the jail back to his cell, where Dillinger said, "Well, boys," to all the guards in his cell, "looks like we're going to need to take up a collection." So the guards emptied their pockets of all their loose change. He collected about $15 worth, and then he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a wooden gun. Waving it in their faces, he said, "Look what I held you monkeys up with. Nothing but a stick of wood." Then, using Deputy Blunk as their human shield, they walked back down the corridor, out the front door, down the steps, this time to the Main Street garage, where Dillinger held a gun in the face of the mechanic and said, "I want the fastest car you got in here today." Well, the fastest car in the mechanic's garage that day happened to belong to Sheriff Lillian Hawley. He put Deputy Blunk in the driver's seat. He put the mechanic in the front seat, in the passenger seat. He and Youngblood rode in the back seat. He told Deputy Blunk to drive north to Chicago. But after about an hour and a half, he told Deputy Blunk to pull over. They got out. He gave Deputy Blunk and the mechanic each about $3 for bus fare back to Crown Point. Then he and Youngblood drove north to Chicago. Well, when Dillinger escaped from that escape-proof jail, he committed a single move that changed the entire game he was playing. You see, he crossed the state line from Indiana to Illinois in a stolen vehicle, and that was the first time he'd ever committed a federal offense, which was an invitation for a man by the name of J. Edgar Hoover to get involved. Now, I know that J. Edgar Hoover looked an awful lot like Elmer Fudd. But no. Deep down inside, he was that jealous Daffy Duck who wanted to capture that despicable rabbit and get the spotlight for himself. Because you see, J. Edgar Hoover knew if he could capture Dillinger, he could get the public support he needed for the establishment of a Federal Bureau of Investigation, the legacy he wanted to leave behind. So, Hoover was on the fast track to capture Dillinger. Dillinger, meanwhile, in Chicago, created a new gang, and they began robbing banks. But already, by the end of April of 1934, the gang realized that the feds now were starting to close in on them. So they decided to do what any good group of business executives would do, knowing that their business was on the brink of collapse. They went on a retreat. They headed up to the woods of northern Wisconsin to a lodge called Little Bohemia. Now, the proprietors of the lodge thought it was a little strange when 6 men and 4 women, because they all had girlfriends, showed up, snow still on the Wisconsin ground in April, and they didn't appear to have too much to do. But frankly, during the Depression, they were grateful for the business, so they didn't ask questions. But within about 24 hours, they discovered to whom they were playing host, and they didn't like it. So they figured out a way to contact the federal authorities. Well, when J. Edgar Duck discovered that that despicable Dillinger was up in the woods of northern Wisconsin, he sent his lead federal agent from Chicago, Melvin Purvis, and his G-men up to Wisconsin to capture that Dillinger once and for all. So Melvin Purvis and his men flew up on a Sunday. When they arrived, they got a lead that Dillinger and the gang were leaving the lodge that night. So they drove through the dark of the woods till they came to the lodge. Now, Sunday night was dollar night at the lodge. Locals came for a plate of home-cooked food for $1. There were a lot of visitors in the lodge that night. Well, no sooner had Melvin Purvis and his men driven up to the lodge when they saw 3 men walk out the front door. Purvis knew that had to be Dillinger and his guys leaving. The 3 men got into a car and started to drive off. Purvis yelled at them to stop where they were, but the car started to move away. So Melvin Purvis turned himself into Yosemite Sam and started to shoot at the car, only to discover that he had just shot and killed an innocent civilian and wounded another. Well, meanwhile, while the gang on the inside of the lodge heard shots being fired outside, they pulled out their Tommy guns and started shooting out the windows. Purvis told some of his men to head to the left of the building and some of them to turn to the right of the building, but he never specifically told anybody to go to the back of the building. And as you might imagine, the building wasn't built in the shape of a triangle. It was a rectangle. There was nobody guarding the back. The gang figured that out. They walked right out the back door, down to the lake, into the woods. They were gone. Purvis and his men stood waiting for the gang to come out for 6 hours. Finally, when the sun started to rise, they tossed tear gas into the lodge, only to discover a lodge full of crying visitors. The result of that raid, 1 federal agent was killed, 1 innocent civilian was killed, 3 others were injured, while the gang once again outwitted, outsmarted American law enforcement. Well, now this time, by the end of April now, the beginning of May of 1934, the gang knew they couldn't afford to stay together anymore. It was simply too dangerous. So they all went in different directions, and Dillinger went to Chicago, where after a little bit of plastic surgery, he found that he could go to Chicago Cubs games, to the movies, to restaurants. But then in July of 1934, that summer, he took up residence with a young woman named NASIG. She was a Romanian immigrant who owned several brothels in northern Indiana, so she was wanted by the authorities for deportation because she was an undesirable immigrant. Along about mid-July, NASIG decided that she could use the $15,000 that were being offered for America's public enemy #1. So she contacted that lead federal agent in Chicago, Melvin Purvis. She told him that the following Sunday, July 22nd, she and Dillinger's new girlfriend were going to go to the movies. Now, she didn't know if they were going to go to the Biograph Theater or the Marlboro Theater, but she would wear a white blouse and a bright orange skirt so that they would be identifiable. Well, sure enough, Sunday, July 22nd came. The 3 of them went to the movie theater, and she did indeed wear her white blouse and bright orange skirt. So the feds identified them right away. They all came to the Biograph Theater, which, by the way, Dillinger wanted to go to because they were playing Manhattan Melodramas, a gangster film, starring Clark Gable, whom he said he hoped would play the role of John Dillinger in a film someday. Well, the federal authorities saw them walk into the Biograph Theater. They surrounded it on all 4 sides this time, and they waited. About 10 o'clock that night, Dillinger came out of the theater with the 2 women on either side of him. Melvin Purvis tried to light a cigar. That was his signal to his G-men that Dillinger was out. He was so nervous he couldn't get it lit, but they knew. And Dillinger and the 2 women started to walk toward an alley when suddenly Dillinger heard a voice behind him. "Johnny!" He turned. The 2 women slipped away, but he could see what was happening. He reached for his back pocket, but 4 bullets went through his body. 1 through his neck, out his cheek, as he fell face first to the ground. Neither captured nor detained, but dead at the age of 31. His body was taken to the Cook County morgue, but they had to put it on display to appease the line of people, about 1,000 long, who wanted to get one last glimpse of America's most notorious gangster. Anna Sage got her $15,000 and was deported 3 years later. Then Dillinger's body was taken from the Cook County morgue down to Indianapolis, where he is indeed buried next to his mother at Crown Hill Cemetery. And so, our trickster was caught. But I'll tell you, our fascination with John Dillinger lives on. We celebrate him in films still today, and everywhere I go, somebody has a story to tell me about the time Dillinger came to a bar in their town and robbed a bank in their town. You'll hear it all over the state of Indiana. You know, it's been said, and I think that you, as folks who dig and spend time in the library, would appreciate this. It's been said that the tricksters in our cultures, the Anansi spiders, the Brer rabbits, the Wile E. coyotes, the Bugs Bunnies, that they're in our literature because really they're present deep down inside of all of us. Right? The trickster manages to pull one over on the people who hold the power and get away with it. And there's a little part of all of us that would like to do the same on an occasion. In fact, 4 days after Dillinger was shot, Mrs. J.F. Brengel wrote an editorial in the Indianapolis Star in which she said this: "There was nothing commendable about John Dillinger's career. He was a bandit, possibly a murderer, and he held people up at gunpoint. But he didn't stand behind a teller's window in the middle of the Depression, blandly smiling while taking our money, as our bankers did, knowing that their banks were insolvent, and they got away without any punishment at all." So maybe we keep Dillinger alive, not to celebrate the suffering that he most certainly caused, but just to give ourselves a little bit of confidence in our own ability to keep a check on the people who hold the power, because sometimes we're all just itching to say to the big guy, "What's up, Doc?" Thank you. And there's the famous photo. You can just see that carrot sticking out of his mouth. Just hear him saying, "What's up, Doc?" I hope you enjoy your time in Indiana, and be on the lookout. You never know. America's public enemy number one might be lurking in the corners. Thank you.
The buses are waiting. Go out the front door, turn right, and the bus on the end will go first. There are several buses when they're waiting. That was great. I had to bleep for part of it.